Good morning, councillors. Welcome. Councillors, there's several starred items. Would anybody like to unstar any items? Yes, Councillor Gates. Thank you. I'd like to unstar 6.4 and that just leaves us with the forward planning schedule and the confirmation of minutes. Are there any other declarations of conflicts of interest? Councillor Taylor, we might deal with the supplementary item when we arrive there, if that's okay with you. So, councillors, would anybody like to move? Thank you, Councillor McDonald, seconded Councillor Young. And we'll deal with 6.1, travel and related expenses.
Thank you, Chairman, for unstarring it. I had a couple of conversations with the media yesterday, and there's some travel that's listed for myself when, as acting mayor, I visited Melbourne. It's listed in the agenda as Yarra Botanicals, and the media thought I went to a flower show, for goodness sake.
Did you go to a flower show?
I did not go to a flower show. I travelled with the Mayor's Chief of Staff and the CEO, and it was a commitment that the Mayor had made prior to knowing that it clashed with his dates, and so I represented the city. It was the launch of a possible new tourism venture, and a number of other things. We also, I think I did an acting mayor's report at the time that covered all of the places, the tourism locations that we visited, and the Chief of Staff and the CEO had additional meetings with regard to a major project on the Gold Coast that's about to start, and also a trip to a major concert venue. So it was jam-packed over 2 days, and it certainly wasn't a flower show, and I just wanted to clarify that because the report doesn't give additional information about what that trip was about, and I also contributed to my airfare. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Why wasn't there a flower show?
I think it's just the name of...
Tourism is a very understated need for our city. I think we should have seen a flower show.
So the good news is that all Gold Coasters can drive to Toowoomba for their flower show.
So good.
And Chairman, I'm happy to move the item.
Oh, yeah. Are there any other questions, councillors? Councillor Young.
Question through the chair, or possibly through the chair to the director, is when it comes to travel for councillors, including the mayor, does that what level of travel does the city cover going forward? I read an article in the paper today, and I was probably inquiring along those lines, as in, like, is it business class, first class? What do we get reimbursed?
Paul.
Through you, Chair. Council, I'll have Jodie answer that for you, if that's okay.
Through the Chair, it doesn't specify what travel class for the Mayor. It specifies in the policy what travel class for councillors, and the staff policy dictates what level of travel for staff.
So through the chair, if that's all right with you, so am I to understand, like, when we say there's 15 councillors, there's 14 councillors and the mayor, and the mayor's classed as a councillor, does it actually say that he's excluded as a councillor?
Yes, through the Chair, it says with the exception of the Mayor.
Mm-hmm. And can I ask, when is the next time that policy is due for a review?
We don't control the councillors' expenses. We control the staff travel policy.
Okay, so through me to Paul, when is the next time that the councillors' expense and reimbursements policy is scheduled for review?
Through you, Chair, I'll have to take that notice and get back to you.
Yeah. And so in regards to the class of travel, so the paper is reporting first class. There's clearly no description of that in the report that we have today, so I'm not too sure where they would have received that information from.
No, through the chair, there is no first class travel in this quarterly report. There was no first class travel undertaken.
Right. So the challenge, I suppose, that we have is just making sure that we get the best value for money for ratepayers. And if anybody's driven that mantra, it has been the Mayor. So clearly, in his first term, he contributed over $100,000 towards travel. So it's a bit of a slight on him in regards to those conversations, but the policy is currently silent. So I'm mindful that we could probably do some work in that space, because I think that whilst it's important that the city continues to explore as many options as possible in regards to driving business to the city, the ratepayers expect us to do that as prudently as possible. And my understanding is the policy's wording is that the council, which is us, is committed to ensuring that travel and expenses and products are procured as cost effectively as possible. So, I acknowledge the fact that Councillor Gates is seeking to move the recommendation as it stands. Is there anybody that is seconding it? Yep.
It's in relation to this, but it probably isn't. I know questions are being asked about, in the trip overseas, how many businesses from the Gold Coast went, and could we have the name of those businesses that attended, please?
Yeah, through you, Mr Chair, I can certainly provide those to you, Councillor. I, like you read in the media, it was up to 26 or 27, but rather than hearsay, we'll get those numbers through to you.
Thank you.
And Councillor McDonald, I expect that would be part of the Mayor's report at full council in regards to the number of businesses. So
It'd probably be nice to, through you, Mr Chair, it'd probably be nice to know which businesses on the Gold Coast took advantage of that trip.
yeah, so I note that the Mayor's Chief of Staff is in the Director's room, and he's going to look at me because he's acknowledging that I mentioned him. Mr Wallace, if you could just maybe ensure that the attendees to the Birmingham events, the Gold Coast businesses, was circulated to councillors, I think that would be appreciated. So, Mr Wallace, I'm assuming that the Mayor is going to include that as part of his mayoral report. Yeah. Councillor Gates.
Thank you. I didn't dwell on the media article this morning, so I haven't read it thoroughly, but I'm happy to move this, and I'm sure that we don't know the full circumstances of the most recent trip, and that it's probably worthwhile having a conversation with the Mayor about it, and perhaps we can work further at full council.
Okay.
Because the trip does not relate to the report that we're looking at today.
Okay. Would anybody like to second the motion? Councillor Taylor. Would anybody like to speak for or against it? So I'm just going to say that from my point of view, I think that there is probably work that the city can do in regards to the reimbursement policy to remove any ambiguity that may exist. I think that that's probably the least that we can do in the foreseeable future, because I think that there's a challenge that we have there in regards to making sure that ratepayers fully appreciate why we enter into these travel arrangements and how we drive value for the ratepayers. Councillors, if there's nobody else wishing to speak for or against, Councillor Gates is closed. Would you like to close, Councillor Gates?
We don't know the circumstances. We've all read a story in the bulletin this morning, and I think we should move forward and look at this report and examine it in the context with which it's presented. It has nothing to do with the newspaper article this morning, and I think we should just vote to recognise what happened in the months between January and March.
Right, yeah. Councillors, all in favour? Carried.
Thank you.
Rightio. 6.2, the infrastructure charge identification, monitoring and collection policy. We have Mr Moran with us if there are any questions. Are there any questions in regards to this? Yeah.
The only question I had is, I was on the audit committee for a time and we talked about this infrastructure collection policy. Having read through the report, it seems quite complex. What's the practical change that has occurred?
So I'm going to have a stab at that and then Mick can have a go if he really wants. So the practical change is for the first time the city is actually taking a detailed look at the infrastructure notices that have been issued.
Yes.
And categorising them into 4 different categories based on volume.
Magnitude, yep.
And in doing so, we effectively satisfy that body of work that was done with the Queensland Audit Office in regards to infrastructure charges and being able to identify when they are due for payment. So as we know, the city's had record approvals, and with each approval generally comes an infrastructure notice.
Yep.
But as we also know, maybe 30 or 40% of those approvals never get built. So there is no point in accounting for an amount of money that will never be received. This is a way of ensuring that we receive the money when it's due, and that nothing slips through the cracks. So, Mick, how did I go? Okay. And I think the most important thing is that the high value infrastructure charges are identified for a long period of time, and it's been a really informative body of work that the city officers have done over a short period of time. So I'll go with Councillor Gates, Councillor Tozer, and then Councillor Taylor, and then Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chairman. It's probably in the report, but is it still the intention to raise the charge at the commencement of the use?
Through the Chair, all infrastructure charges are raised or levied at the time that the development approval is given, and that will always be the intention. So.
No, my understanding is not that it's when it's given, it's when the use commences.
Oh, so
through you, Mr Chair, the charges are, an estimate of infrastructure charges is given at the time an approval is given,
Yep.
but they're not payable until the use commences, and that's...
Correct. So what are we doing in that space to ensure that we're aware of when the use commences? Because I'm aware of situations where there's been $1 million, for example, unpaid for a number of years because we weren't aware that the use had commenced. So what are we doing in that space in the new policy?
Through the Chair, so the policy categorises all development into 4 broad categories, and so that's based on the type of development that's occurring and the value of the infrastructure charges that is associated with that development. And then for each of those categories, there is a time frame associated with a review. So, for instance, a small development, a duplex, has a review timeframe of 9 months. At the end of the 9-month period, a report is automatically generated, which is delivered to our infrastructure charge review group, and that prompts them to review the charge at that point. And that's the same for the other categories. They have different timeframes.
But is it self-reporting, or do we have a regime where we check on these?
Yeah, so through the Chair, the policy itself is our mechanism to ensure that the charges are reviewed.
By whom? By whom?
By our infrastructure charge review group. The way the legislation is written in Queensland, it says for a material change of use application, the charge is payable at the time the use commences. The city's not always sure when that is, so this is the purpose of the policy, is to ensure that we're capturing those charges moving forward.
I'm sorry, I just don't understand how it's different and how we intend to capture it. If someone starts a use at Yatala and our officers aren't wandering around checking every property. How does the review group intend to become more aware of when the use commences if people are not self-reporting the commencement of the use?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So in addition to the reporting that Grant just mentioned, we actually now, through the support of the council, have additional staff in the team who will do a range of, I guess, checks and measures to identify these properties. So based on the initial report that comes through, there'll be desktop reviews, looking at near map to see if there's actually buildings there, but there's no charges payable, site inspections. So I guess there is, an element of manual work for officers to check because they're the ones that generally slip through. The usual measures to capture charges are when you've got a subdivision, so a developer can't seal their plans until they come through council, and we don't allow plans to be sealed until the charges have been paid. The other one is building certificates, so when they come in, there's a review to make sure charges are paid. Where we're missing charges or where we've missed them in the past is when neither of those things have happened. Someone's done something not quite correct. And the reporting that we've now got gives us a head start. So we actually narrow down which ones are at risk, and then it's sometimes down to just manual officers going out.
Thank you. That explains it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay. Councillor Tozer.
Thank you. So through the chair, I'm interested in how we as council might be able to be kept informed of this process, not because we want to keep an eye on officers, but I think it's actually really interesting. So the reason I think it's interesting is because someone lodges let's say a 20-storey building, and then when they want to sell those lots and someone's going to move in, they have to contact us to seal the plans, and it's at that time we don't actually let them do that until they've paid the bill. That's a really easy mechanism because it's driven by the money. Sometimes an infrastructure charge is payable for an intensification of a use that the business is operating. They continue. So, practical example in Gilston, I've got a leaf vegetable farm who's building a second warehouse. There's going to be an infrastructure charge payable probably on their additional building because of the additional draw on infrastructure. But we're never going to know when they've started the use of that additional building. So I think the point I'm trying to get at is there going to be a report that we can review on a 6-monthly basis or 12-monthly basis that can give you some local knowledge as to whether a use may have started or not? Is that something that could be done, or?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. We don't have anything scheduled or there's nothing on a forward schedule, but we can bring a report to either this committee or maybe Planning and Environment Committee annually or 6 monthly.
I mean, annually seems reasonable, or 6 monthly seems reasonable, and it might go to the EPE committee because that might be the most appropriate committee to send it to.
Councillor Tozer, would you imagine all categories? So there's 4 categories. That might end up being quite a healthy report.
Yeah. The short answer is I actually don't know what makes sense. What I'm trying to do is that every divisional councillor has local knowledge about whether something started or not. And often, I think what happens is you might get a 20-storey building lodged and approved, and then it turns into a 35-storey building. And that might not happen, or there might be some other use that, some expansion of an industrial use. I think this is much more interesting for industrial uses than it probably is for, towers that are being sold off. Off a lot.
So my interpretation of it is the sealing of the plans is the easy stuff because, but the building works being completed is also relatively easy as well because you actually can't get industrial insurance unless you can provide your certificate of classification in regards to the completed building works. So it would be a seldom happen that somebody would spend $1 million building a building and then not seek to insure it. And in order to insure it, they're always going to need that classification, and the classification is the trigger. So where we maybe lose it is if it's not a significant volume of building works or it's a minor change that's triggered some type of infrastructure.
Through the chair, could you give us an example of something where the QAO, like an example of a type of development where the QAO was like, there's been an outstanding infrastructure charge that you didn't call in? Is there a practical example? In a hypothetical, of course,
Through
no
the chair.
specific thing involved.
Yep. Through the chair, yes, there has been, particularly ones where the use has commenced for, say, a welding company, but the use has since ceased. We've missed our chance to sort of recover the charges there because the use isn't currently occurring on site anymore.
So they incurred an infrastructure charge, they commenced the use, and then the use ceased. But because the use ceased, because we haven't followed it up, we never got the charge that was.
Exactly. There's no development offence. Sorry, through the chair.
Or there's no longer a development offence.
Yeah, no longer a development offence occurring on site.
Right, and so this new policy effectively enables us to have a mechanism to follow that use up more sooner than the use concludes.
Through your chair, yes, that's right. So the policy is probably following on from the practice that we've since adopted, since the council supported us with some resources. So at the moment, we've currently got a team that's doing this work, actively following up charges, and today this policy is kind of getting council's endorsement just as the final step in the process that the QAO instructed us to go and do. So.
Yeah, okay. Do you mind me asking, I don't know if it's able to be public, but do you mind me asking, what was the magnitude of the infrastructure charges we were missing out on? Is that able to be shared?
There were two amounts. One was the headline amount, which was all of the infrastructure charge notices that had been issued but hadn't necessarily been activated. And then there was the net amount, which was the amounts that were actually identified after a process. So maybe I don't think they're confidential, but...
Through the chair, each year the infrastructure charge review team do a full audit of infrastructure charges and report an amount to financial services to take up in the annual report. That amount has declined over the last several years. This year the amount that was advised to take up was just shy of $5.3 million. So,
okay. So the report is we're doing a better job than we have done in the past, and part of that's because of the formation of this policy, but it's still not an insignificant magnitude of outstanding infrastructure charges that we do need to follow up now using this policy. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, that's correct. Several years ago, the amount was closer to $9 million.
Right.
The policy, what the policy is seeking to endorse, the process does work. It is ensuring that we are collecting money when it's due.
Yep.
That can be seen through the numbers.
But the headline amount was 1.3 billion or a huge amount, because that's what is issued as an estimate of the infrastructure charges when an approval is granted.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it'd be interesting. I don't want to I can't change the recommendation I'm not on here, but I actually think a 6-monthly or 12-monthly report to councillors, keeping them across some of that would be good. Clearly, you guys have worked hard on it to take it from $9 million to $6 million, but I think that actually makes sense for councillors to be kept informed of some of that body of work that is clearly lowering the burden on ratepayer if we're collecting more money that is actually owed to us. It's good.
Councillor Taylor, then Councillor Young, then Councillor Hamill, then Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, and through the chair, and I think we've been touched on it, but I just want to clarify, we have our DA, and then at the application of building application is when the triggering of the infrastructure charges apply. And I just need to understand that when we have a development application, is there any notification for that property that there is a possibility of an infrastructure charge for the property because there has been a development application approved? And I'll give you an example, and I know exactly directly myself. There was a DA approval. A purchase was made, and the new owner was unaware of that infrastructure charge, and the new owner had to pay that infrastructure charge, even though it didn't appear on any searches. So my question is there a way that we can ensure that, one, we're obviously ensuring if there's a change of use, we're capturing it, but two, it also puts a notification for any future purchases that there is or could be a particular infrastructure charge on that purchasing of a property?
Had the use of the venue commenced?
Correct.
Assuming it's a venue.
Through you, Chair, I'd have to take that somewhat on notice. I don't believe at the moment that there is a property notification that applies. So sometimes we put property notifications on that might say you've got a stormwater management plan on this property or something like that. So when a conveyancing solicitor does their searches, that comes up. At the moment, I don't believe that infrastructure charges are on those notices. It is possible. Typically when commercial developers purchase land, they'll often get a planning certificate, which will identify when charges are payable or not, but it doesn't, usually a mum or dad buying a duplex won't pick that up. So I'm happy to take that on notice and see if we can add a property notification somewhere along the line.
Councillor Young.
Thank you, and through the chair, I note that, and in what Chair said about, 1.3 billion, and we're now looking at, I think it's 5.6 million or something like that in charges. Noting that on page 24 of the report, it does say that the resourcing is being monitored to ensure that the appropriate resources are dedicated to the review of this. In considering that infrastructure charges are a very large source of funding for the city's, water and sewerage and the likes, and transport and stormwater, is there enough staffing there, or even if it was, 1 or 2 members of staff? I don't know, because it's not, I'm not in that field, but with the amount of funding that we're relying on there, especially with the way the industry is at the moment, is there sufficient staff in place to ensure that we keep on top of this?
Through you, Chair, at the moment I believe there is. So a few years ago we didn't have any staff to do this. The council supported us with getting Lauren into a different position, and Lauren has 3 staff in the team. So at the moment it's enough staff, but we'll keep an eye on it, and if we think we need more, we'll respectfully come back and ask at a budget committee.
Oh, that's great. That's the answer that I was looking for. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Hamill and then Councillor McDonald.
Wasn't a question, Mr Chair. Happy to move it when you're ready.
Okay, well, let's deal with the questions first. Councillor Hamill. Councillor McDonald.
Thanks, Mr Chair. Look, I agree with the notification on rates, and the reason being is I know that there's a number of developments that are happening where a company is created for that development, and once they sell units or duplexes, the company's then dissolved. So how would that capture when that happens? To go back to the, to the person who was the developer.
Through the chair, all infrastructure charges attach to the land, and they're binding on the owner and the owner's successors in title. So if that was to occur, the new owner would become responsible for the infrastructure charges that were unpaid.
So that's why it's so important that we bring the rates system into it.
Are there any other council or questions? Councillor Hamill, would you like to open? Would you like a seconder?
That would be helpful.
Would anybody like to second? Councillor Gates.
Very short, Mr Chair. Sounds like this is just tidying up something that we're already doing in practice, which is working well from everything we're hearing from Mick and his team. Happy to endorse it, and that can consider that as my close as well.
Anybody else would like to speak to it? So I'll add that not only is it tidying up what's in practice, it's actually formalising in a policy something that was missing, and it's probably long overdue, and it'll keep the external members of the Audit Committee happy. And Lauren, thank you for the work that you did on it. All in favour? Carried. 6.3, advertising spending policy. Does anybody have any questions to Nicole in regards to the advertising spending policy? Councillor Tozer.
Outside the chambers before, I asked if there had been any practical changes, and it was relayed, no, there's none. This is just an adoption of a policy where we've incorporated the divisional newsletter policy into this, and that's pretty much it. Yep.
Yep.
Great.
Excellent. Would anybody like to move it? Move Councillor Hamill. Anybody like to second it? Thanks, Councillor Patterson. Would you like to speak to it? No, I'm fine, thank you. Okay. Would anybody like to speak for or against it? Excellent. All in favour? Carried. What's your problem?
I just came here for some fun and a good visit, and it's just all a bit tense.
You've brought those Western Gold Coast vibes.
Happy Gold Coast vibes from the West. Sorry, mate. It's all serious business here. My bad.
6.4 delegations. Paul.
Through you, Mr Chair, we'd like to withdraw this and revisit in 822 through GAF.
Right. So that solves that. So I'm assuming that we'll need a procedural motion just withdrawing the item. Moved Councillor McDonald. Anybody like to second it? Seconded Councillor Gates.
Secretary is struggling a bit.
Through you, Chair, through the next GAF for 822.
Okay.
Thank you.
For review at the next. Yeah.
Will that give you enough time organisationally in regards to any proposed changes to structure or delegates?
Through you, Chair, I think it will, given what's coming up to Council next Monday.
Yeah.
So much to look forward to.
A gift, a true gift. Councillor McDonald, would you like to speak to your motion, or would you like to rely on Councillor Hamill?
She'd rather speak to Councillor Young.
Okay, all in favour? Carried. Councillors, we have a supplementary agenda, which is 6.5, which involves dealing with the petition that we had received in regards to the land adjacent to the Surface Plaza Resort. So we have Mr McGuinness is with us and Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I just want to remind everyone at the last full council meeting in relation to petition, I did raise a conflict declaration, which I believe was resolved, so I presume that will continue with this particular item.
So was that, and Hamish is with us, so can you just come forward, Hamish? I just need to be clear as to whether or not it's a declaration that carries forward to this meeting, or whether or not it will require Councillor Taylor to go through the process.
Sorry, Chairman,
again.
it doesn't carry forward.
Yeah.
And I have a problem.
Yeah. So Hamish.
Through the Chair, Councillor Gates.
Right answer. Okay.
Chairman, if I could just explain so that Councillor Taylor understands as well. When we last considered his declaration, which in my recollection related to the fact that the unit owners have a contract with Councillor Taylor's company, it only involved the presentation of a petition. It wasn't any decision that the council was making. I have a very different opinion today when making a decision about the matter than at the time when Councillor Taylor purely presented the petition for our future consideration and that of the officers. So I would suggest that Councillor Taylor needs to make his declaration all over.
Councillor Taylor.
And I'm happy to make another declaration. This is the declaration that I will be making is the same declaration that was made the first time.
You need to make it
Oh, you
and
have
put it on the screen.
Councillor Tal.
Yep. Do you want me to bring it up? So
Yes, please.
Should we have a coffee break?
So, Councillor Taylor, you're using these same words that from the last council meeting, is that correct?
I'm
And
using
then
the-
you're going to change the reasoning at the bottom.
correct. It's the same that we used for the very first time it came to council for the decision of selling of the land, and it's the exact same declaration that was resolved for the petition.
Sorry, this needs some work. I think perhaps we need to take a 10-minute break to get
So,
the words right,
Thank
because
you. So, Hamish, can you help Councillor Taylor in regards to his words? And we'll adjourn the meeting and come back at 5 minutes to 10. I reckon we've dealt with that item, and I reckon we should bat on for 6.5. Okay, welcome to the return of our viewers. We have Councillor Taylor making a declarable conflict of interest declaration. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. The declarable interest I've got is my parents are shareholders of the company Dayshaw Pride Limited. This company has a contract services with the body corporate of Surfers Plaza Resorts. My sons run the business and the company at the present time.
Right. So I'm going to ask a quick question there. So you have no equitable interest in the business?
No.
But your parents do, and
Correct.
your sons currently run the business?
Correct.
So it could be a related party?
Related party.
Right. Go on, Karen.
Yep. It's my, the reason why I would like to participate is I believe that as a councillor of the area, I have the view that the participation in this matter is in the interest of the public and brings to matter open, and I bring an open and persuadable mind, noting that the matter before the committee today does not touch or concern the above interest and is quite separate.
Councillor Patterson, do you have a question?
Not a question. No. I have a comment.
Okay, so before we get to the comment stage, does anybody have any questions for Councillor Taylor in regards to his declaration? Does anybody have a procedural motion that they would like to move?
Well, look, I am going to move a procedural motion that Councillor Taylor not participate today. Yeah. And my explanation would be that I think, and I would like this confirmed before I proceed, that this is the business that Councillor Taylor in fact ran when that contract was initiated with Crown Plaza, I should imagine. Or during, before your election as a representative, were you the manager of the business, Dayshelf?
I can't comment on that. I don't know the exact date because we only have had the contracts in the last 2.5 years, so I'm not sure of the exact date of the actual agreement. We have previously...
But were you the manager
over the
of Dayshelf?
I can't, the current contract, I'm not sure the date of the start of it, but over a period of time, we've had the building on and off over a long period of time. So every time there's a tender in any of these buildings we have tendered, we didn't have it for a period of time, we do have it now.
So Councillor Taylor, I think you've in part answered Councillor Gates's question by using the word we, you know, so like, I mean, as in, I think the essential part of the question was, were you part of the executive management team of Dayshelf prior to becoming a councillor?
I'm going to say yes.
Yeah, thank you.
And I do have management discussions with the business now and play a role.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think on that basis, Councillor Taylor, in your own best interests, you're better off not participating in the debate about this matter. In the old days, it would be considered a material personal interest and you wouldn't get a choice because your family is benefiting from the operation of that company about which you've made a declaration. So that those provisions don't apply under the current guidelines, but the fact that your close relatives are working in the business and you're still involved in the management at a level, I just feel it's in your own best interest not to participate and for us to make that decision. So not everyone might agree with me, but I would move that due to the declaration that Councillor Taylor has made, that he not participate in the debate or the decision.
You don't want to second that? I'm assuming you want to comment. So I've got a mover and a seconder, and then I'll, if it's okay with you, Councillor Gates, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. And look, I do appreciate where you're coming from, and I thank you for looking at protection. I think when the decision was originally made, I did raise a conflict declaration at the time, which did give me the ability to deal with the body corporate as long as we took notes and minutes of those particular meetings. I feel that I have been, as a local member, carrying out my duty to talk to our representatives that are in the building and taking those notes right up into this particular time. The only thing that I would ask, and again, I'm to the floor, is even if I'm not part of the decision making, I have had a involvement from before a decision was made by council on this subject through to now with permission after having other declarations. So, look, I am open to the floor. All I'm just bringing to the floor's attention is I was given the opportunity to represent after declarations and take notes.
And to Councillor Taylor, I think if we can view this as a separate point in time, so you've conducted yourself in accordance with the curbs or the conditions that were placed on you in regards to an earlier discussion, and Councillor Gates has moved that you not participate in the decision today, and in doing so, we're in a different set of circumstances as opposed to saying, for example, you participate in the discussion today but don't vote, or any other of those type of combinations that are available to the floor. So at the moment I have a mover and I had a seconder in Councillor Patterson. And so that's what we will deal with now, unless somebody wants to foreshadow an alternate version, okay, which you're not allowed to do. And there are no, to best of my knowledge, there are no other conflicts in relation to this matter here today. I'm noting that the Mayor will inevitably make a declaration in regards to the matter at full council. Councillor Patterson.
May I just speak to this?
So we might, Councillor Gates, if you...
I don't need to say anything further. This brings this issue
So you're happy that you've
to
opened?
a head. So,
Yeah. So Councillor Patterson, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I just wanted to say why I'm voting differently on this to when this conflict has been raised before, and it's because it's a different matter of concern. So I was comfortable when the conflict was proposed in terms of a general sale of the building, but this is bringing a concern of a select group of people who have a particular focus and interest, and they're requesting the councillor to support that, and the councillor's family has a significant or has a financial benefit or interest of their relationship with them. I also want to say that I think the councillor has, Councillor Taylor's done everything properly and appropriately to date, and it's totally acceptable and right that they put forward their petition. This is just making sure that we are clean of conflicts in the decision. Thank you.
But just be mindful of what you say and why you say it.
Look, I'm just saying that my views that I would like to express is not saying I am supportive or not supportive of the recommendations. What I would like to do is actually bring to the table the concerns of residents in this particular building and the challenges they've got, and that's all I would like to do in bringing it to the council's attention, is bringing their concerns to the table. So, as I said to Councillor Patterson, it's not something for support, it's just something that I can actually bring to the table the concerns of residents that could be affected by this decision.
Yes, you can, Councillor Tozer.
So my question is through you to Councillor Gates. It occurs to me that there is a significant public interest in the Division 10 constituents having their voices heard through their divisional councillor. Would Councillor Gates be open to the idea that the Councillor Taylor could participate in debate but not vote, so that the public interest in him bringing those views to the table on behalf of his residents occurs, because there is a public interest in that, but then...
I don't personally agree, because in bringing whatever Councillor Taylor wants to the table today, he's going to influence the decision.
Yeah.
My view is because of the family association with those people, he should not be involved in this decision. And by bringing issues to the table or by discussing it further from his perspective, he possibly will influence the decision, and I don't think that's appropriate at this point in time.
And just so I've got it clear, that's not appropriate because the building of these constituents has a relationship with the business connected to Councillor Taylor's family.
Very close connected, yes.
So, all right. So is that the case? Would that be effectively the case with any building where that business has an engagement, or is it just
I'm
this
speaking specifically about this issue, Councillor Tozer, and I'm happy for guidance to be sought from the City Solicitor about my stance today, and I'd obviously be guided by it. But my strong feeling is that on this occasion, at the pointy end of the decision, Councillor Taylor shouldn't be involved. And it's regrettable that the legislation is such, but of everyone in this room, I'm more than aware of the heartache one feels as a divisional representative when you're not able to be involved and represent your community. It's damned annoying. But the fact is that the legislation's there, and I think as a council we're complying with it and doing our job today by saying to Councillor Taylor, sorry mate, you can't be involved in this one.
Noting that the legislation has dollar thresholds as well, which are quite low in the scheme of things, you know. So, and here we're dealing with 150. How many units are in the plaza? 150 units, and it might be a multi-year contract with $100 or $200 of fire services. I don't know, you know. So, and fundamentally, the car park itself also. The property that we are talking about, which is the city's property, also benefits from those fire services, I would imagine. So. Did anybody else want to speak for or against? Yep, sure, Councillor.
Thank you. It's my memory that when this matter first came, we were first dealing with this conflict, when there was a sale, we did make the decision that Councillor Tozer could engage with...
Councillor Taylor.
Councillor Taylor, sorry, could engage with the group, take notes and have an officer present. Was that right? So in terms of that representation, it won't be the same. However, the reason why we created that is so that there is documentation and so that officers had note of those meetings. So I think there is a good sense from the officer's perspective in terms of what would be presented at those meetings with the councillor.
I'm going to take that as a comment rather than a question. So would anybody like to close? Councillor.
Question on whether that was okay, whether that happened.
Yeah, Councillor Gates.
I don't need to close, Chairman.
Okay, councillors, we're going to vote, and Paul, we need to take a division on the vote. So councillors all in favour of the motion. So Councillor Owen-Jones, Councillor Hamill, Councillor Gates, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Baldwin Lumsden, Councillor Pauline Young, Councillor McDonald, noting that Councillor Taylor did not vote. Sorry, Councillor Taylor, if you could leave the room and we will invite you back shortly. And the challenge that we have is not in the conduct of Councillor Taylor, which I think has been exemplary, and he has followed the instructions that he received in regards to his previous declarations. I think the challenge that we as councillors and committee members have is following the state's legislation in regards to this. So I don't think it brought any of us any joy in regards to what we had to do there, and I don't think anybody should see that as a criticism of either the committee or Councillor Taylor, who has done his best to represent his residents in a challenging situation. So councillors, let's deal with 6.5. clearly we had a petition that the council received. The petition asked us to do certain things, and I think that the report, in my view, deals with the majority of those things. I see no reason to change the recommendation. I'm happy to move the recommendation. Councillor Pauline Young is happy to second it. But if anybody has any questions, we have Ross here who may be able to assist. Councillor Patterson.
Through you, Chair. Ross, could you just confirm when the residents in these that have proposed the petition purchased their properties, would their contract or their purchase have given them a ongoing right to a park? So, because it's my understanding that they didn't have one. They did have a benefit for a time, but that wasn't a part of their contract of their ownership of their property. And so it was nice that they had a parking on the side, but they didn't actually have a legal right to it.
Through you, Chair. Councillor Patterson, I can't speak specifically to that because I've not viewed the CMS for the property to determine what rights may have been referenced in that in respect to car parking. But suffice to say, from the outset of that development in 1987, the car parking for the scheme was on leasehold, was a leasehold interest only, which is unusual in the extreme. So essentially those original off-the-plan buyers and any subsequent resale buyers have never had, as would be in a normal strata scheme, a car park that's on common property and an exclusive right there too.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. And in follow-up to that, not from an officer's perspective, but as someone who's experienced in purchasing and dealing with property, would you think that it would be the responsibility of a conveyancing lawyer to make that evident to a purchaser that they don't actually own a car park?
Again, through your Chair. Again, unfortunately, that old adage of buyer beware, again, conveyancers probably know, and that's you pay a conveyancer peanuts and you get conveyancer advice. If you had engaged a solicitor, perhaps you would get better advice in that space. I think historically, again, because of the unusual nature of the parking tenure for this particular property, whether people were cognizant of that or not, I'm not sure. But again, it's really a buyer beware situation for individuals. It's really the scheme now purporting some broader right is quite fanciful.
To my understanding of the residential properties in Central Surfers Paradise is generally when there is car parking available in body corporate controlled properties, the parking bays are generally numbered and noted as an exclusive use under the body corporate scheme. So I don't think there are too many body corporates that would exist that allow a free-for-all in regards to the parking. So I think that there's a bit of licence that's been had in regards to the expectations of some of the property owners in this particular property in regards to their expectations of being able to have a car park or multiple car parks available free of charge for their exclusive use. And the fact is that over a long period of time there's been a lease payment that either has been made or should be made to the actual property owners that benefit from taking that risk of being the owner. So Ross, on page 6 of the supplementary agenda, there is reference to the city's independent valuer placing a value of $100,000 per annum on the effectively on the charge. What has been the charge to date to the body corporate in regards to the current leasing arrangements?
So through your Chair, the licence that remains on foot between the city and the body corporate that attaches to Lot 6 is $1 per annum. And that $100,000 figure that's referenced is essentially the city under the local government regulation is obliged to dispose of an interest in land. So if we entered into a lease in the fullness of time, it should be at or above market rate. The rate applicable for transit centre has just been used as a benchmark of circa $2,000 a year per car park. There are around 50 car parks that could be placed on our land. So that's where the figure of $100,000 was determined, as would be the market rate for that if we were to enter into a lease.
And so the nominal arrangements that were put in place in 2018 was between the city and the then body corporate, or the body corporate committee?
That's correct.
So for at least the last 5 years, if not a lot, three years,
since 2018,
there's been an arrangement in place that all of those owners were aware of. So on page 6 of the supplementary agenda, it talked of how the city had received a late request in the tender process following a meeting between the resort and the divisional councillor, who I'm assuming was Councillor Taylor, for the tender close date to be extended and provide the resort with a further opportunity to make an offer to purchase lot 6. What was that period of time that the tender was extended for?
We extended it for another 7 days.
And were there any requests for information from the body corporate in regards to the tender that you're aware of?
No, not direct. And I'm certainly unaware that they contacted the sales agents who are engaged.
And so the prior to the extension of 7 days, how long was the property on the market for during the most recent campaign?
I would have to stand correct. I think we ran it for 6 weeks, just to give under the regulation we're required to run it for a minimum of 21 days. Yeah. But we extended it for that period and then extended for that further week.
And in making that 7-day extension period of time, are you aware of whether or not the body corporate made any indicative indications of what it was interested in doing? So clearly there was a 7-day period to provide an extension of time. Had they talked of terms or dollars or anything along those lines?
The feedback we received was simply that they felt aggrieved that the period for them to submit an offer was insufficient and they needed further time. So for transparency and fairness, we extended that for a week to give them that opportunity. And as I say, nothing was forthcoming.
And so, Ross, you've now been in council for a fair period of time, so you've probably got a fairly good understanding of what our property portfolio looks like. Are you aware of any other residential properties on the Gold Coast where the city provides 44 car spaces?
No, Jim, no.
Thank you. Councillor McDonald.
I just wanted to ask, through you, Mr Chair, after that week extension, has there been any further discussions that have taken place in regards to that area?
Through you, Chair. Councillor McDonald, I'm aware that there's been ongoing discussions as between Councillor Taylor and the body corporate, which I think has crystallised in that petition being submitted, but I'm not privy to the conversations or what was discussed.
So I've got Councillor Tozer and then Councillor Gates.
Normally when we address a petition, we normally have a resolution that talks about writing to the lead petitioner. Is there a reason why we haven't done that in this instance? Can we? Because we're responding to the petition and obviously we're proceeding with the sale, but normally there's a standardised kind of that the council write to the lead petitioner letting them know. And if it's okay, I mean, I'm not, again, on the committee, but I think it would actually make sense for them to have a copy of this report or a link to it and potentially even a copy to the live stream that we provide of this meeting so they can review what we've discussed quite robustly and,
So, Councillor Tozer, I have no intention of changing the recommendation, but having said that, it's clearly a public document and it's clearly in their interest. And I don't think that there is anything that prevents Councillor Taylor from pointing any interested parties in that direction.
Of course.
And clearly, I think that the officers have dealt with it in very short time frame, given the nature of the tender process that was open. Councillor Gates.
Sorry, Chairman, I just had a question given Councillor McDonald's last question and Ross's response. Were you able to review the notes that Councillor Taylor took at his meetings?
Through your Chair, no, I've not seen any of that detail.
So,
Gates.
just through you, Chair, do we know who may have reviewed those notes before this report was constructed, please?
Sorry, through your chair, no. The notes, as I understand, were taken by Councillor Taylor's PA. I've not seen those notes. I'm not privy to the content of the discussions.
Right, yeah. So it might be that they are provided to either property services or alternatively through to the probity auditor, the probity advisor that was appointed.
Chairman, I think I'm happy to support the recommendation today. I don't have a problem with that, but I would like someone to review the notes on behalf of these people. The intent of Councillor Taylor taking notes, in my understanding, would have been, in case he's out of the room today, so that we still have a record of the commentary around his meetings. So I don't think today we've been given any insight into that, and I would like officers, or maybe the notes can be distributed to us from those meetings in advance of full council, just so that we have thoroughly reviewed the position of the tenants of that building.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, just through your chair, just to respond to that, Councillor Gates, I did, whilst I haven't seen the details of the notes or the minutes of the meetings that were held, I did have a number of follow-ups from Councillor Taylor's PA to respond to issues that had been raised. Primarily, that was copies of previous council reports and confirmation of some of the advices that had been provided, which formed part of those reports previously. So there was really nothing beyond that I provided to Councillor Taylor's office on the way through.
And I have no doubt that the officers will have thoroughly reviewed everything that came forward, no doubt at all. But I think there's little point in making a condition that a councillor keeps a record if no one gets to see it.
Councillors, are there any other questions? So I'm happy I'll speak briefly to it. Clearly, this is a relatively unique set of circumstances for the city in the regards to the current use of the property and the historical use of the property. We have an obligation to all of the ratepayers in the city to manage our affairs as prudently as possible. In this regards, I do know that we appointed a probity advisor to assist the council and the council officers in the transaction. I think that the supplementary agenda has dealt with the requests through the petition in a fairly even-handed way, and I think that we should proceed as we had originally intended. Would anybody like to speak against? Excellent. We'll take the vote and I'll call the division. All in favour? So Councillor Owen-Jones, Councillor Hamill, Councillor Gates, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Baldwin-Lumsden, Councillor Pauline Young. Against? Councillor McDonald. Councillors, is there any other business for the meeting today? Let's call it a day at 10:26.